Arturo, it's a great pleasure to see you in our studio.
Likewise.
What's the general trend in your rating over the past few years? Which countries are facing the biggest challenges or the opportunities?
I think generally speaking, what we see is that competitiveness and hence the prosperity of countries is improving gradually more and more after the financial crisis. So the world economy is doing better, and I think we are facing an optimistic era. I think the parts of the world that are challenging are still Latin America, emerging markets, particularly in Africa, and some of the economies that are heavily exposed to potential financial problems. And I'm thinking here, for example, China and all of the countries in Southeast Asia that are massively indebted and then can suffer a little bit in the future.
When it comes to Asian economics, what's your point of view regarding the economic growth in the next few years?
I think that Asia is certainly one of the areas of potential for the world economy in the future. There are several issues, but something that I want to point out that particularly worries me about Asia is that unlike other regions in the world, even historically, Europe, the Middle East, even Africa or Latin America, I think there is a massive lack of social cohesion in the Asian continent. And what do I mean? Wherever you go in Asia, they have a bad neighbor. So the Koreans hate the Japanese hate the Chinese hate the Indians hate their Pakistanis, and so on. And Asia lacks economic and social cohesion that I think will jeopardize its opportunities for the future. For example, there is no common language in Asia. There is a common language in the Middle East, Arabic. There is a common language in the Western world, English, but there is no common language in Asia. So I think there is this problem that I think is going to pose some challenges for the future.
You mentioned some problems in Latin American countries. Do you expect default in Venezuela?
I think that Venezuela is already defaulted. That is the reality is that Venezuela is trying to sell and liquidate assets, but technically speaking, meaning you are unable to pay your debt, Venezuela is already in default. I think the question is how they are going to manage to please and appease their creditors to make sure that there is no massive liquidation of assets, particularly assets in the United States.
As far as I know, you are very optimistic regarding the economic of European Union. What's your point of view on the economic growth in this region?
Europe is coming back, certainly. I think we went through our worst crisis ever, and despite all the pundits of the Euro and the European Union that were forecasting that the European Union would be destroyed several times, it has not happened. And in fact, we have re-emerged much better and much stronger. I think what it is more important for Europe today to realize is that the Europe of the future is in the East, not in the West. And Brexit is a problem, but I think Brexit shows that the way how Europe has to be moving towards a more promising economy is towards the East. Poland, Slovenia, Lithuania, Estonia, all of those countries that are making the European Union more innovative and much more competitive.
What's your view on the US economy and how can tax reform affect the economy?
Well, on paper, Trump's policies are perfect for competitiveness. You just need to see stock markets in the United States in 2017. So on paper...
But my point of view is that financial markets in the United States grown on expectations.
Yes.
But anything significant hadn't been done yet.
Exactly. That, you see, is interesting because I think the market expectation and the sentiment is positive as long as President Trump has not done anything. I think my main fear is when President Trump's policies are implemented in any way. And then we will truly see the impact. But you're completely right. I think that so far, so good. That is, as long as Trump does nothing, markets keep on going up. But they keep on going up because on paper, those policies sound good. Now the question is, once they are implemented, they are not sustainable in the long term, and then we will see the problems.
Okay, and who can benefit from the tax reform? Because there's a point of view that only super rich people and big corporations can benefit from this tax reform.
Look, from the very neutral competitiveness point of view, low taxes are good. Of course, it has a social cost, but from our perspective, countries that have low taxes, they spur economic development and growth. At the same time, economic growth has the cost of increasing inequalities, and balance that dilemma is going to be extremely important. But we see consistently that countries with low tax rates, be it income taxes or corporate taxes, they are more competitive. In the US, of course, the problem is that income inequalities are already massive, and this is going to increase those inequalities.
OPEC deal to cut oil production may end earlier than expected. And it's important to notice that it helped the Russian economy as well to stabilize the situation. How can this affect the global market?
That's a very good question. Actually, I see that there are two groups of countries today. The countries for which the oil crisis was helpful because they restructured, they saw resiliency, they adapted, like Russia, and countries that they didn't take the opportunity yet to restructure their economies sufficiently well.
Do you think we restructured our economy?
You didn't, but I think Russia has. Actually, I've seen very interesting examples of how, in the context of an economy in which you cannot depend on oil, then you have looked for other sources of revenue. Okay? Of course, Russia has suffered, but compare what has happened in Russia, what has happened in Brazil, for instance, which is another BRICS country, oil dependent, or Venezuela, to go to an extreme, in which those countries have not taken the oil crisis, meaning low oil prices, an opportunity to find new ways of generating revenues.
So can we face any challenges?
You mean Russia?
Russia as well, yeah. If the OPEC deal can end earlier than expected.
Well,
so that's my question.
Well, I think that the challenge is how the world economy finds a way to readjust itself to this new normal of prices. But I think at the same time, we're moving away fast from an oil-dependent economy. First, by diversifying economies, and second, through other sources of mobility, particularly electric cars and the likes.
You suggested that it's better to forget about GDP when it comes to the evaluation of countries' competitiveness. Could you elaborate on it?
I have seen in my last year's experience at the World Competitiveness Center many countries and governments that focus on GDP as a metric of performance and hence as a metric of management. So my objective as a politician is to make sure that my economy grows. Okay? What is the economy that has grown the most in the last 60 years, meaning the economy whose GDP has grown every single year since 1960 is Colombia.
Yeah.
Colombia is the growth champion of the world economy in terms of GDP, but we cannot claim that Colombia is the successful
what
economy.
indicators should be added?
I think that we need to realize that GDP is a performance indicator, but it is not a value driver. This growth only shows, is like a necessary condition for prosperity, but it is not sufficient. The drivers of growth and prosperity are education, are infrastructure, are good regulation, are good institutions, and those result in GDP growth. But we need to focus on the drivers, not on the performance indicators. So I rather measure the quality of the education system rather than measuring GDP as a measure of the success of a country.
As far as we know, World Bank is going to change the methodology. Could you please tell us what was wrong with the previous methodology?
It is, first, let me say that I sympathize with the World Bank, because I'm in a business in which we try to measure something that is very difficult to measure. I think the World Bank has identified some issues in their measurements that were highlighted by Chile, a country that was not satisfied with the rankings. The World Bank investigated and found that some of the metrics were not appropriate, and then they're readjusting. I think recognizing the mistake is actually something that has to be warmly recognized. I think the fact that they're going to look forward to the methodology and adjust the rankings is kind of irrelevant, because I don't care about the ranking of my country in 2010. But I think what it shows is that we need to be extremely careful with the institutions that measure our competitiveness, because it has a very strong impact. I mean, we at IMD, being an academic institution, play a lot of emphasis on the quality of what we measure, because we realize that government make decisions both based on those measures.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.